welcome to Another Day, Another Evil. I'm your host Melissa.
And I'm your host Georgina. And today's episode's going to be a long one, so we're going to dive straight in. Enjoy!
Okay, so this week we're going to look at one of Britain's most notorious serial killers. Not only did he strike fear into the local community, but the police investigation was equally as notorious, given that it was completely bungled. Not only did they interview the suspect at least 9 times, only actually finally connecting him by accident to the murders, but the investigation highlighted several failings within the police force, particularly the misogynistic attitudes and an infamous incident of being completely blinkered by irrelevant information. This is, of course, the case of Peter Sutcliffe. Just note that there will be some mentions of violence, suicide, sexual assault, and some details of a potentially gruesome medical nature. Listener discretion is advised. Whilst Sutcliffe is often known as his infamous moniker, here at Another Day, Another Evil, we do not wish to sensationalise or glamorise this, so we are choosing not to mention it. Given that we try to focus on the victims of true crime, we wish to honour the victims' families, one of whom, Richard McCann, son of Wilma McCann, is outspoken in his wish that these such names are not used. Richard said, quote, "I'm pleading, can we no longer use this term? Think about the families and what it does for those who were affected. Please bear in mind the word. It serves to re-traumatise us families left behind because it's a description of how our loved ones, how they were maimed, how their injuries were inflicted." So there are hundreds upon thousands of documentaries, books and podcasts about Peter Sutcliffe. So today we will only give a brief account of his history and his crimes, and we will aim to spend the majority of our time looking at his victims, the police investigation and the aftermath. Peter William Sutcliffe was born on the 2nd of June 1946 in Bradford, West Yorkshire, one of 6 children. Sutcliffe's father was abusive towards his mother, whom Sutcliffe idolised. Sutcliffe had voyeuristic tendencies as a teen and, after leaving school at 15, worked a number of manual jobs before landing a job as a lorry driver in 1976. In April 1974, Sutcliffe married Sonia Surma, who he remained married to until 1994, well after his arrest. He died on the 13th of November 2020, aged 74, following complications from COVID. So, since his arrest and conviction, there are many cases which are thought to have been linked to Sutcliffe, but given that they're not confirmed, we're just going to focus on those confirmed to have been committed by him. I won't be going into detailed descriptions of their deaths, but Sutcliffe's MO was to attack women with a hammer and then mutilate their bodies with a screwdriver or a knife. I'm going to take you through a timeline of his attacks. In 1969, Sutcliffe attacked an unidentified woman who survived. On the 5th of July 1975, Anna Gulskidge, aged 36, was attacked in Keighley, West Yorkshire, but thankfully survived. On the 15th of August 1975, 46-year-old Olive Smelt was attacked in Halifax, West Yorkshire. She survived. On the 27th of August 1975, 14-year-old Tracy Brown was attacked in Silsden, West Yorkshire. She survived. On the 30th of October 1975, 28-year-old Wilma McCann was attacked in the Chapeltown area of Leeds, West Yorkshire. This will become relevant later when we come back to the investigation, so keep it in mind. And she was just 100 yards from her house when she was attacked. She was Sutcliffe's first confirmed murder victim, and her body was found later that same morning. So, the first confirmed murder victim, Wilma, was born Wilma Mary Newlands on the 1st of July 1947 in Dumbarton, Scotland, the 6th of 11 children. The family moved to the Isle of Skye for 2 years in the 1950s, when her father got a job there as a plumber, and she was remembered as being a bit of a rebel, but she was also a kind person. In 1964, she moved to Leeds, where 6 of her brothers had actually settled. Wilma had a few run-ins with the law for minor offences, And sadly, it is her arrest photograph which is often linked to the infamous crime, which of course unfairly prejudiced her against the public. She eventually found some stability working as a waitress, which is where she met Gerald McCann. The pair were married on the 7th of December 1968, and Wilma gave birth to their first daughter shortly afterwards. The couple had 3 more children in quick succession, but the marriage deteriorated. This marriage breakdown led to Wilma's mental health declining. A number of boyfriends who were drunk and abusive came and went by, but Wilma was remembered by her children as caring, often going without food to ensure that they were fed. Speaking to the BBC in 2019, her son, Richard McCann, who has been outspoken over the treatment of the victims by police and who is now a motivational speaker, said that he struggles to remember her as a person, but he can remember making crepe paper flowers and knocking on doors to sell them to raise money. The original investigator on the case, Detective Chief Superintendent Hoban, attempted to push the idea of Wilma being a mother in order to garner leads for the case. He had her 4 children pose for a photograph with their toys in order to promote this. However, the press decided that she was promiscuous and therefore a prostitute, drunk and terrible mother, and that's the idea that's actually stuck. Wilma was laid to rest in Lawnswood Cemetery in Leeds on the 21st of January 1976. Following Wilma's death, her 4 children were taken into care, then sent to the care of their abusive father, and then back into care in the foster care system. Her son Richard, who was only 5 years old at the time of her death, spent some time in prison for minor offences before turning his life around and becoming a motivational speaker. His sister, Sonia, who was 7 years old at the time and later went by her mother's maiden name Newlands, sadly passed in 2007 from suicide after battling with an alcohol addiction. Next, on the 20th of January 1976, 42-year-old Emily Jackson was attacked and killed in Leeds, with her body being found the following morning. Police found a boot impression on her thigh from a Dunlop Warwick Wellington boot, likely from a size 7. Emily was born Emily Monica Wood on the 30th of March 1932 in Hemsworth, West Yorkshire, the second of 12 children. In her teens, the family moved closer to Leeds for job opportunities. She began work in a weaving factory after leaving school and met a roofer, Sydney Jackson, when she was 19. The pair married on the 2nd of January 1954 and quickly had 2 children, Derek in 1955 and Neil in 1958. Emily suffered abuse at the hands of her husband, and the couple separated a couple of times and also had another 2 children, a boy Chris and a girl Angela. Her husband wanted to set up his own roofing business, and it was Emily who made it happen, teaching herself accounting and also getting jobs and dealing with the contractors. In 1969, the couple's eldest son, Derek, aged 14, died in a horrific accident, which caused Sydney to withdraw into his grief, whilst Emily had to provide support for them all. By 1975, Sydney's business was in financial trouble and Emily was forced to turn to sex work at her husband's urging. Her son, Neil Jackson, who was only 17 at the time of his mum's murder, said, quote, "I just want to protect my mum's memory because she was a joyful woman who would do anything for anybody." Sydney and his son Neil had to go to the police station to identify the body, but because Sydney couldn't do it, it was actually left to 17-year-old Neil to make the confirmation. During the autopsy following her death, the pathologist, whilst they couldn't be certain, said that there was a strong possibility that her death was linked to that of Wilma McCann. Sydney was interviewed at length, claiming that Emily had a sexual appetite that he could not satisfy, before confirming that she had been engaged in sex work, leaving out the real reason for her doing so. This idea she was a sexually obsessed prostitute again stuck, and it was this murder that really solidified the idea that Sutcliffe was targeting sex workers. Emily was laid to rest next to her son Derek in May 1976. After her death, her family were torn apart. Her children were separated from one another and her husband Sydney sank into a depression. Her son Neil said, quote, "Dad was even more bad-tempered over it. He went into a depression. As I always say about Sutcliffe, he didn't just kill my mum, he killed the whole family. It left me arguing with Dad. me not speaking to my brother and sister. Sadly, 45 years on and the damage is still there. So next, on the 9th of May 1976, 20-year-old Marcella Claxton was attacked in Leeds. She survived. On the 5th of February 1977, he attacked 28-year-old Irene Richardson in Leeds. Her body was found by a jogger early that morning. Tyre tracks were found at the scene, but these could have matched over 100,000 vehicles in West Yorkshire alone. So Irene was born Irene Osborne in Scotland on the 28th of March 1948, one of 10 children. She was described as a shy, sensitive child, but grew into a bit of a rebel, often in trouble at secondary school for smoking and playing truant. At 17, she moved to London and worked a series of waitressing and chambermaid jobs in hotels. In 1966, she became a single mother, cut ties with her family, and, unable to cope, relinquished her daughter to the foster care system. She later contacted her sister, who was living in Blackpool, and moved there, finding more work in hotels and again falling pregnant at age 21. She then met 28-year-old divorcee George Richardson, who convinced her to put the baby up for adoption at birth in October 1969 so they could be married, to which she agreed. The pair were married 8 months later on the 5th of June 1970. By 1975, the couple had 2 daughters together, but George was abusive towards Irene, and in the summer of 1975, Irene fled to London alone. A few weeks later, they reconciled, but Irene fled again in April 1976, and George placed his daughters into care. Irene had met a man in London, and the pair moved to Leeds in 1976. They separated in January 1977, and Irene fell onto hard times, depressed and seen wandering about the Chapeltown district of Leeds in the days leading up to her murder. The pathologist concluded that the same killer of Wilma and Emily had also killed Irene. Police could not confirm that Irene had turned to sex work, and her estranged husband George and the man who she had most recently been dating denied this. This, however, did not stop media speculation, and this concept has again stuck to this day. On the 23rd of April 1977, 32-year-old Patricia Atkinson was attacked in her home in Bradford. A friend tried to call on Patricia later that day, and after receiving no answer to knocking at the door, he entered the flat to find a pool of blood and her dead body. Police later found a bloody footprint from a size 7 Dunlop Warwick Wellington boot, which matched the footprints found at the Emily Jackson murder scene. Patricia Atkinson, or Tina as she was known to her friends and family, was born on the 9th of July 1944 in Bradford, one of 4 children, although her sister died in infancy when Patricia was only 6. She left school in 1959 at aged 15 to train as a burler and a mender. So I had to actually look up what this was, and it's a job that was predominantly held by women who inspected and repaired woven fabric in the textile mills.
Interesting.
So while she was working there, she met Roland. I've also seen him called Raymond, so I'm not 100% can't 100% confirm what he was called, but Roland or Raymond Mitra, who she married on the 1st of April 1961, and the couple quickly had 3 children, daughters Judy, Jill and Lisa. Patricia was only 22 years old and her marriage eventually broke down. So I've seen conflicting reports here that Patricia was engaged in sex work, which led to her marriage breakdown, and that also after the breakdown she had to turn to sex work. But either way, she was engaged in sex work and had received a caution for soliciting in 1975.
So, sorry to interrupt here, it's quite funny that so far all of the murders, if you ask me, seem to be the blame of the men who they were with.
Yeah.
Since they kind of ended up leading them to sex work, or not even leading them to sex work, but they seem to all be in marriages that have broke down or been in abusive marriages, which of course is the men's fault.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting as well, because as we'll come to find out later, obviously the media speculation puts all the blame on the women, and there's all this thing about them being at fault for their murders, essentially. So, very interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, we spoke about it in previous episodes where there's this whole victim blaming culture, especially towards women, and how they are seen to be potentially blameworthy for their murders, which of course they are not.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, we'll come back onto this later, but definitely interesting to point out.
Yeah, sorry, I felt like I just had to say something whilst it was in my brain, otherwise I'd forget, so please carry on.
Okay, so 10 days prior to her murder, Patricia had begun renting a newly built flat, which was already falling into disrepair. The caretaker there recalled that Patricia was no trouble and always appeared neat and attractive. She's the only known victim of Sutcliffe to have been murdered inside and the first to have been murdered outside of Leeds. Obviously, the early attacks that had taken place outside Leeds, but these had not yet been linked to Sutcliffe. After her murder, her ex-husband was called to identify her body and was then left to break the news to their now teenage daughters. She was laid to rest at Scolmore Cemetery on the 27th of June 1977. On the 26th of June 1977, 16-year-old Jane MacDonald was attacked in Leeds, with her body being found by 2 children that morning. So Jane was born Jane Michelle MacDonald on the 16th of August 1960 in Leeds, the first of 3 children. Both of her parents had been previously married and she had 2 half-sisters from them. She was described by her mother as always being so happy and always laughing. She loved the Bay City rollers, dancing and roller skating. Jane's family actually lived only a few doors down from Wilma McCann, and Jane had actually babysat for her children a few times. So by 1977, at the time of her death, Jane had finished secondary school and was working part-time as a shop assistant. Her father had to identify her body and remembers how her blonde hair was caked in blood. She was laid to rest on the 20th of December 1977 at Hare Hill Cemetery in Leeds, and her father sadly passed away in 1979 at age 60, not knowing who killed Jane, and he was buried next to his daughter. So an autopsy confirmed the links between Jane and the other victims, and the media frenzy began, with papers running headlines claiming how Jane was an accident and how she was innocent. George Oldfield, who was now leading the inquiry into the murders, published an open letter in the Yorkshire Evening Post which included, quote, "An innocent 16-year-old lass, a happy, respectable, working-class girl from a decent Leeds family crossed your path." So, we've discussed this rampant and disgusting misogyny, but I think it's important to note here that Jane's family advocated for all the victims and did not condone the police and press categorising them as being innocent and not innocent. This one was definitely a changing point, and it really solidified the hatred on the victim blaming for the previous victims who were all engaged in sex work, as if like they didn't matter. And then Jane comes along and because she was 16 and she wasn't a sex worker, people felt that it was an accident, it was somehow different to murder her compared to the murders of all these other women before.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's something that we keep talking about, isn't it? The idea of a proper victim and an improper victim, but it's really good that Jane's family advocated for all the victims and weren't misconstrued by the media, because it is so easy to get wrapped up in the media, and especially I think in then times, nowadays we know that the media aren't necessarily always correct or on the right side, and ultimately they're owned by people who have political agendas and other agendas, so they go down that way, and you can quite easily tell with the wording in some places what their standpoint is. And I think that nowadays it is more known in society, that not everything you read in the newspaper is true.
Yeah.
But I think definitely in maybe those times, I mean, I don't know, I wasn't alive, but you can assume that maybe less so, and it is good that they weren't swayed by that narrative that was put out.
Yeah.
And that it created this turning point that you're talking about.
Yeah.
That, actually, maybe they weren't to blame.
Yeah. I think it's interesting as well because up until this point with the other victims, people weren't really aware of everything going on. They weren't aware that there was somebody out there attacking and killing people, or they didn't care because obviously we just mentioned this, they weren't worthy victims. They weren't people that we should care about, which is obviously crap. We know that. But at the time, that was the attitudes towards them. Whereas with Jane's murder, there was definitely this sense of fear that was struck into the community because it wasn't now just sex workers, or if you were mistaken for being a sex worker, then you were likely to be targeted. And actually, the media and the police were pushing the innocence of Jane as if the other victims weren't innocent. So yeah, there's a lot that we could delve into here, but we also have a lot to get through. Oh, I will just say one other thing, and I don't know if we come on to this later in this episode or whether we come back onto this when we do our extra episode in which we focus on the survivors of Sutcliffe. But when we're talking about Jane's family, and you said about it being good that they weren't swayed by this narrative, it is because actually some of the survivors were really reluctant to be linked to Sutcliffe because they weren't sex workers, and the fact that they were linked to him was tarnishing their reputation, and the trauma that must cause to have suffered something so horrific and then to be linked to something and being blamed for that something. Obviously, we know it's not their fault, and even if somebody is engaging in sex work, they don't deserve to be murdered, they don't deserve anything bad to happen to them. But to survive something and then not want to be linked to it because you've then got this idea that you are some kind of sleazy, blameworthy, sex-mad woman who's brought this on herself. So I think it's important to just bear that in mind while we're talking about the rest of it. But I will keep going.
Yeah, definitely. Keep going.
So, on the 10th of July 1977, 42-year-old Maureen Long was attacked in Leeds. She survived. On the 1st of October 1977, 20-year-old Jean Jordan was attacked in Manchester, the first known attack to have taken place outside of West Yorkshire. Sutcliffe was disturbed during this attack, and he realised he had left behind a newly minted £5 note, which he'd received in his pay packet only 2 days earlier, which he'd used to pay Jean for her services. After her body was not immediately discovered, again, one of the first ones where it hadn't been discovered the same day, he returned to the scene over a week later, but could not retrieve it. Her body was discovered later that day, and the £5 note was found by the police. Despite interviewing Sutcliffe on the 2nd of November about the £5 note, he supposedly had a strong alibi and was let go. Just one interesting little bit of information here. If you know anything about this case, you will know that the person who discovered Jean's body was the actor who played Les Battersby in Coronation Street.
Ah, that's interesting.
Yeah, he's on a lot of documentaries. He talks about kind of the trauma of finding her body. But yeah, definitely just a little bit of interesting
little side note in there for you.
Yeah. So Jean was born Jean Bernadette Jordan to an unmarried mother on the 11th of December 1956 and lived near Glasgow in Scotland. Just before her 16th birthday, she left Scotland without telling anyone and boarded a train to England. So details here are unclear and I found conflicting information, but she did meet a man named Alan Royal and the couple had 2 sons before Alan was made redundant and the couple moved to Manchester. The relationship became tense, and whilst figuring out how to escape, Jean turned to sex work in 1976, but the two were still living together. On Saturday the 1st of October 1977, Alan headed out to meet friends, leaving Jean watching television and the children in bed. When he returned, the bed was unslept in and the children were still asleep in their beds. Alan went to bed, wondering whether Jean had returned to Scotland on impulse, so something that she had actually done previously. 9 days later, her body was found on some allotments. Police were initially unable to identify Jean, with the Manchester Evening News running an article asking, "Who is she?" The body was described as being somebody aged between 15 and 30. Alan saw the article and recognised some of the clothing and contacted the police. Initially, the police did not think she was engaged in sex work, but this was later disputed by a fellow sex worker who ended up identifying Jean's body. Alan later claimed that whilst she had once engaged in sex work, she was not engaged in sex work at the time of her death. And this is something that he's been really adamant about in more recent years, but again, unclear. And Jean was laid to rest on her 21st birthday.
Oh, that's so young.
I know. Awful.
It's crazy to think that, she was that young, and that it's just such a waste of a life.
I know, it's so sad, and those poor children. So the pathologist who carried out Jean's autopsy recognised similarities between Sutcliffe's previous victims and Jean and attempted to arrange a meeting with George Oldfield, who was leading the investigation, but he didn't want to admit that the killer had expanded the murder area. At an inquest held on the 31st of May 1978, it was concluded that Jean was another of Sutcliffe's victims, though of course he was still unidentified at the time.
So can I just ask, so at this point he'd only been questioned once by the police?
I think so, yes.
About the £5 note?
About the £5 note. We do come back onto this later when we talk about the police investigation. Yeah. But yeah, the £5 note would have been a very easy way to find him, and they didn't. On the 14th of December 1977, 25-year-old Marilyn Moore was attacked in Leeds. She survived. Tyre tracks at the scene matched those found at Irene Richardson's scene. On the 21st of January 1978, 21-year-old Yvonne Pearson was attacked in Bradford. She was reported missing the following Monday, but her body was not found until the 26th of March by a passerby. So Yvonne was born Yvonne Ann Pearson in Leeds on the 2nd of February 1956, one of 4 children. At age 17, she left home and moved into a city centre flat. In 1974, she met a man who she would have 2 children with, but they never married. With her partner unemployed, she turned to sex work to support the family. Patricia Atkinson, so Sutcliffe's 4th confirmed murder victim, had also been one of Yvonne's friends, and in 1977, another one of her friends was murdered. So Yvonne was also, at one point in 1977, badly beaten by a client, but with numerous fines for soliciting and no other way to pay them, she was stuck in this vicious cycle, like she had to continue with the sex work. So the babysitter was concerned when she did not return to her children, and when Yvonne failed to show up to a solicitor's appointment on the Monday, she was reported as missing. Police issued a notice about her disappearance to regional forces, but the press was not initially notified. Neighbours of Yvonne said that she'd have never left her children, who she absolutely idolised, so they knew something was wrong, and Yvonne's children stayed in the care of their father. When her body was discovered 2 months later and her autopsy was conducted, Professor Gee, who was involved in linking all these cases and consulting on all these cases now, was unsure whether Yvonne's death was connected with the rest, given that there were no indications of a hammer attack, so some people actually thought that it was a copycat killer. On the 31st of January 1978, 18-year-old Helen Ritka was attacked in Huddersfield, West Yorkshire. Her twin sister Rita was initially too scared to go to the police, but she finally reported Helen missing on the 3rd of February, and her body was discovered soon after. So Helen was born Elena Maria Di Matteo on the 3rd of March 1959, but was more commonly known as Helen. Helen and her twin sister Rita grew up in a financially struggling household, but were very well loved. A second set of twins joined the household in 1960. In 1969, Helen's parents separated and all 4 children were put into care. At aged 15, Helen and her twin sister were finally fostered by a couple. After they left school in 1976, Helen took a job in a confectionery packaging plant and was described as being a hard worker, prompt and very cheerful. Helen enjoyed going out on weekends and spending time discovering her Afro-Caribbean roots from her father's side. At aged 18, Rita, so Helen's twin sister, dropped out of college and left the flat that she shared with her twin, which left Helen distraught. She eventually tracked Rita down to a flat in Huddersfield where, with no other means of supporting herself, she had started engaging in sex work. This was something that Helen did not wish for her to go through alone, so Helen quit her job and moved in with Rita. Her autopsy confirmed that she was indeed connected to the other murders. Given that Helen's body was found before Yvonne's, she was classed as the 7th victim by the press, and she was buried at Scolmore Cemetery in Bradford on the 9th of March 1978. On the 16th of May 1978, 40-year-old Vera Millward was attacked in Manchester. Her body was found later that morning. Tyre tracks at the scene matched those from earlier scenes. Vera was born Vera Evelyn Millward in Madrid, Spain, on the 26th of August 1937, in the midst of a civil war. World War II ended when she was 8 and she left Spain in her teens to move to Manchester. In the mid-1950s, she met a man who she had 5 children with, though they never married. The relationship broke down after their last child turned 15, and Vera met another man who she had 2 more children with, a son in 1969 and a daughter in 1972. Again, they never married. At some point between the 2 relationships, Vera had turned to sex work. After the birth of her last child, she had undergone several major operations and was crippled with chronic pain, so she'd had to give up sex work. Her autopsy linked her to the other murders, but very little press covered her case, again owing to the fact that she was deemed merely a prostitute by society, as opposed to the chronically ill mother trying to support her family that she was. She was laid to rest in an unmarked grave near to the one of 20-year-old Jean Jordan. On the 2nd of March 1979, 22-year-old Anne Rooney was attacked in Leeds. She survived. Sutcliffe was not originally linked to this attack, but he confessed to it later in 1992. On the 4th of April 1979, 19-year-old Josephine Whittaker was attacked in Halifax. Her body was discovered later that morning. Boot prints matched those from earlier crime scenes, and the right sole showed some wearing and twisting in the centre, possibly from the wearer regularly pressing his foot on some kind of pedal. This suggested the possibility that the killer could be a lorry driver. When Sutcliffe was interviewed again in 1980, he later claimed that he was actually wearing these boots and they went unnoticed by the police.
I bet he loved that.
Yeah. I can imagine. Obviously, we're going to come back to the police investigation, but definitely interesting to bear this in mind.
Yeah, it's just... I won't say anything that I'm going to say. I'm sure I'll probably say it later on, so I'll save it for that.
Yeah, save it for that. We'll focus on the victims at the moment. Born Josephine Ann Whittaker on the 19th of December 1959 in Halifax, her parents separated soon after her birth, which left her to live with her mum and her maternal grandparents for the first few years of her life. Josephine loved the outdoors and was described as confident and fearless. At the time of her death, she was working as a clerk in the Building Society and also part-time as a bartender. Given how close her body was found to the road, police initially thought that it could have been a hit and run, but the autopsy by Professor Gee confirmed that the killer had struck again. George Oldfield, in his press release, described Josephine as being, quote, perfectly respectable. Again, which sadly reinforced this idea to the press and the public that some victims were more innocent than others. Josephine's murder was the last before the Wareside Jack incident occurred, which, as we'll discuss later, led the police on a wild goose chase. This murder also occurred outside of the red light districts, which prompted the police to urge women not to walk alone at night, and again we'll come back onto this later. On the 2nd of September 1979, 20-year-old Barbara Leach was attacked in Bradford. Her roommates were concerned when she had not arrived by the following evening, and the police were called. Her body was found in the subsequent search in the afternoon of the next day. So she was born Barbara Janine Leach in Kettering, Northamptonshire, on the 5th of January 1959, and she had one brother. She was very academic and moved to Bradford to study social psychology at the University of Bradford. Just before starting her final year in October 1979, she had travelled to Greece and Italy in the summer after saving lots of money from her holiday jobs. Her parents were, of course, very concerned about her living in Bradford given the ongoing murders, but Barbara was confident and independent. Barbara's father had to travel from their home in Kettering to Bradford in order to identify his daughter's body, and Professor Gee confirmed during the autopsy that Barbara had been killed by the same person. Again, the press focused on Barbara being respectable, which of course she deserved the attention, but it's sad that not everybody got that same treatment. Her funeral was held on the 24th of September 1979 and she was cremated. A tree was planted at the University of Bradford in Barbara's honour on the 20th of October 1980. Her mother was unable to redecorate Barbara's room and the family struggled to rebuild their lives following her murder. On the 20th of August 1980, 47-year-old Marguerite Walls was attacked in Leeds. Her body was found the next day, and given that she was strangled to death with a length of rope, the police did not link this to the previous murders. Marguerite was born on the 17th of December 1932 in Lincoln. She moved to Northern Ireland with her family in her early teens and worked various jobs before entering the civil service in 1968. After a few job moves, she moved to Farsley in 1978 to join the Department for Education and Science as an executive officer at the Pudsey branch near Leeds. Marguerite never married and she was described as being a deeply private person. Her brother Robert travelled from Lye in Stourbridge in the West Midlands to identify her body. As I've just said, her death was not initially considered to be perpetrated by Sutcliffe, and it was only after his confession that it was linked. She was the first victim to be strangled. On the 24th of September 1980, 34-year-old Upadhyaya Bandara was attacked in Leeds. She survived. On the 25th of October 1980, 20-year-old Mo Lee was attacked. She survived. Sutcliffe never actually confessed to this attack, but Mo says that she recognises Sutcliffe and believes he is the one who attacked her. On the 5th of November 1980, 16-year-old Teresa Sykes was attacked in Huddersfield. She survived. On the 17th of November 1980, 20-year-old Jacqueline Hill was attacked in Leeds. Later that night, a passerby found Jacqueline's blood-splattered bag and called the police. But a 3-minute search by the attending officers did not result in anything else being found, and her body was located by a passerby the following morning. She was born on the 22nd of May 1960 and was the eldest of 3. The family lived just outside of Middlesbrough in the north of England. She attended grammar school and became a Sunday school teacher at her local church. After finishing her A-levels, Jacqueline wished to pursue a career in the probation service and gained some experience volunteering. She then enrolled at Leeds University. On the date she was murdered, she was in her final year, had already completed her probation service training and had paid a holiday deposit abroad for the following year and had a job interview lined up. After the police absolute fuck up in finding her body, it was confirmed to be another in the awful series of murders, again linked to Sutcliffe, though the police were reluctant to admit this to the press. After Jacqueline's murder, many female students left Yorkshire or were essentially confined to house arrest. Public opinion towards the police was hostile and everyone was terrified, and more protests began happening. On the 25th of November 1980, Margaret Thatcher, so the Prime Minister, summoned other government ministers, and the following day, George Oldfield was removed as head of the investigation. 3 days later, Wareside Jack was announced as a hoax, and they finally decided that the killer was likely a local Yorkshireman. Again, we're going to come back onto the Wareside Jack incident, so just keep this in mind. Jacqueline was laid to rest in her hometown on the 19th of December 1980. She was the last confirmed murder victim of Peter Sutcliffe, and her father passed away 6 weeks after Sutcliffe's trial and was laid to rest next to his daughter. Okay, so if you know anything about this case, you will know, and I've already obviously alluded to this, but the police massively fucked up their investigation. So let's just delve a little deeper into just some of this, because we'd be here all day. One thing which was at play, which isn't entirely the fault of the police, is the fact that all the inquiries, evidence, investigatory material, everything, all the leads, they didn't exist on a computer. It was boxes and boxes of paperwork, and I think at one point it just took up an entire floor in the police station. And that's the leniency that I'm going to give the police, because this is definitely by far, I would say, way down the list of issues as to why it actually took them so long to apprehend Sutcliffe. Especially since towards the end of the investigation, as the murdered women were actually piling up, the police were offered the use of a computer, but they turned it down due to the cost, which I understand, there's costing problems, but when you've got bodies and bodies of women and just no leads, no viable suspects, or nobody in handcuffs, then you've got to make some kind of deals.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it, as to whether if it was middle class men that were being targeted and killed, how long it would take for them to find the suspect or accept help.
Yeah, or if all the victims had been... They obviously kept pushing this agenda of this woman was perfectly respectable, and this one was... Jane McDonald was the first innocent victim. If they'd all been that category of women, would it have been different?
Yeah, they'd all been classified by the police and the press at the time as innocent and not blamed.
Yeah.
Would they have quite happily gone, do you know what, actually, yeah, it's a cost, but it's...
Justified.
Yeah, justified cost.
Yeah. So, that actually takes us perfectly onto what I was just going to tell you. So, one of the key failings through this entire thing is plain old misogyny. The first few victims, because they were classed as sex workers, or they enjoyed going out drinking, or they led what was considered at the time an immoral lifestyle for a woman, obviously, both the press and the police considered these victims as being not as worthy as, for example, 16-year-old Jane McDonald, who was killed in 1977. When this happened, the press ran headlines saying that it was, quote, the first mistake, because the killer had taken the life of a, quote, innocent victim. Even Sutcliffe actually used this later in his confession, saying that he felt guilty when he realised she wasn't a sex worker. And whether this is true or not, obviously we're taking it with a pinch of salt, because it's a lot easier to play up to this idea that he was killing sex workers because the police and the press were portraying this image, and it's easier to go, yeah, that's exactly what I was doing and I just made a mistake.
Yeah, they definitely gave him a mantle to work with, didn't they?
Yeah.
And I do wonder whether, because they gave him that mantle, he did play up to it more.
Yeah, because there's already some justification there, because the press and the police and the public didn't care, so...
Yeah, it was like, oh, it's fine, he's just killing sex workers.
Exactly.
Which, obviously, that's not what he was doing, but also, that is a problem.
Yeah. And I mentioned earlier that Wilma lived in the Chapeltown area of Leeds, and this was a known red light district. So this, of course, reinforced this idea that she was a sex worker, and then the other victims were in and around red light areas. So again, whether they were or not, it was easier to lump them into this. Well, they're living in this area, so they must be a sex worker because they actually enjoy going out drinking, or they're struggling to make ends meet, or whatever was happening in their lives made them not innocent and not worthy victims in the eyes of the police and the press and the public. Obviously.
Yeah, and I think it's key to note here that we don't think that anyone who partakes in sex work is by any means less of a person as it was made at the time. We're going with kind of the annotations put towards sex work at that time that is not how we feel. I just want to make that clear. Like, people choose sex work as a job, and that is totally fine, and we have no issues with that, and I think it's a respectable position to be in if that's what you want to do. However, the thought at the time was very much you turned to sex work to make ends meet, to get money that you didn't have, and I think the thought at the time was women didn't want to do sex work, whereas maybe they did, and maybe that was their choice at the time, but it was definitely not construed that way.
No, and also it wasn't even, well, these women are turning to sex work to make ends meet. It's these women are morally corrupt and they're doing something.
Yes.
Not supporting their families, because there weren't as many jobs as there are today for women, so it wasn't that they could just go out and get a job as easily or make as much money as easily as you perhaps could do today. So there was definitely this idea of moral corruption.
Yeah, exactly, and I can't remember which victim it was, and please do tell me which one it was when I start talking, because I can't remember. But the victim whose husband lost his job, so then begged her to turn to sex work because, like you say, there wasn't as many jobs for women to go to, so maybe that was one of the only options for her at the time, because it wasn't easy to get a skilled job as a woman.
No, and that was Emily Jackson, the second murdered victim.
Yes, thank you, Emily Jackson.
Yeah, so we were just talking about the police and the press having this preconception about the women. So Jim Hobson, who was a senior officer with the police force, was quoted as saying during a press conference that the killer had, quote, made it clear that he hates prostitutes. Many people do. We, as a police force, will continue to arrest prostitutes. But the killer is now killing innocent girls. That indicates your mental state and that you are in need of urgent medical attention. You have made your point. Give yourself up before another innocent woman dies. So in the actual quote, the killer used the moniker that Sutcliffe had been given, which is really hard to not write into this because it is everywhere in all the quotes, in every press coverage, all the sources. Well, not all. Probably 98% of the sources in the headline, it is Sutcliffe's moniker rather than Sutcliffe's name, but I've replaced that to killer in this quote. So this idea, obviously, of worthy and not worthy victims played a huge role in allowing Sutcliffe to walk free for so long, even at trial, which is horrific. But even at trial, the prosecutor, Sir Michael Havers, said, quote, some girls were prostitutes, but perhaps the saddest part of the case is that some were not. The last 6 attacks were on totally respectable women. And I would also like to make it clear that when I'm using the term prostitute here, I'm using it in the context that it was used at the time. These are quotes. We know now that we do not use that term. We use the term sex worker, but the police at the time and the public used the word prostitute, just to make that clear. Not only was less done to find Sutcliffe because he killed women deemed less worthy by society, but women who weren't sex workers who were attacked by him were initially ignored by the police, despite, in many cases, actually being able to give accurate descriptions of him. So because they weren't sex workers, the police were like, no, you have not been attacked by Sutcliffe, despite the fact that they all actually described him accurately. Later on, after it was accepted that Sutcliffe was not just murdering sex workers, there were lots of initiatives to give women curfews, and many women, rightly fucking so, lined the streets to protest against this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm speechless. Why, as a woman, we already do enough to not get attacked and raped and anything in the streets. Why should we have to not go out?
Yeah.
I've just started researching my next episode that I'm doing, and we'll talk about it in there as well, because funnily enough, this was in the 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
Mine is in the 2020s. So funnily enough, we're still not focusing on
the real problem.
The real problem. That is not women going out at night, because why should we not be allowed to go out at night? Like, I work in hospitality. I'm quite often out late at night because I have a life around my job, so I've got to take the dogs out and everything that is in the dark. I should not have to, as a woman, stay inside just in case a man decides that he's going to attack somebody.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because actually all the statistics tell us that women are going to be attacked by men. Obviously, other things happen, but the statistics tell us that that is the most likely course of action. I am not going to get stabbed by a woman walking down the street, statistically. I'm not going to get attacked by a dog. That is not going to kill me walking down the street. People don't go in the sea at the beach because of the really slim chance of getting attacked by sharks, and people go out and kill sharks when there's been a shark attack. But when women are attacked by men, women have to put extra protection in for themselves, and it's not men who are getting the curfews, even though they're the ones out there committing the attacks. And yes, not all men, I know that, but if you are sat there thinking not all men, then you are part of the problem, because I know it's not all men, but I have to be wary of all men. And you are, as a girl, you are brought up, don't trust that man, don't trust that man, don't trust that man. What does he want with you? You don't date somebody who's, like, if you're 14, you don't date a 16-year-old, or even a 15-year-old, because he wants something more from you. You need to be careful with what this man wants. But then the same men, so men are telling me that, but then the same men are like, well, it's not all men.
Yeah.
But I have to be wary of all men.
Yeah.
I have to be wary of all dogs who might attack me. Like, I have to be wary of all men until I know a man.
Yeah, and I think without going on to a whole rampage of...
Which could be maybe we should do a whole different podcast about feminism.
Yeah, and as a woman, you do have to do that. And I think that it's really difficult because, like you say, statistically it is men that are gonna attack women, but also, like, men will always pose a threat to women because they are bigger, they have more force behind them, like, naturally they
biologically speaking.
Yeah, biologically speaking.
As a generalisation.
If you looked at the whole, like food chain in nature, it's always smaller animals that get eaten by bigger animals.
Yeah.
So using that kind of generalisation, women will always have to be more cautious around men because they are more likely to cause harm to us because of that. But also then there's this whole thought process that we have in society behind it as men aren't the problem, not all men.
Yeah.
Which we know, not all men, but some men.
Yeah.
So we do have to be careful. And also that then really does lead into the whole victim blaming, because if we're putting curfews on women, that is then blaming the woman for going out at night.
And it's them modifying their behaviour to stay safe rather than potential threats modifying themselves to be less threatening.
Yeah.
There is no reason why, if you are putting a curfew on women, the curfew couldn't be flipped and be put on the men. Like,
oh, absolutely, it could easily be put on the men, but then that would cause a whole societal uproar.
Yeah.
And
it's like the whole, for example, having female-only gyms. People are unhappy with that because why can't there be male-only gyms? Well, because it's a male-dominated space, and in that environment, if women are dressing in a certain way and feel uncomfortable being looked at in a certain way, being sexualised in a certain way, then those protections are, like, why can't we have a female-only gym? For example, just female-only buses, female-only this, that and the other. People who are really against this idea of women being safe are a threat to women. Yeah. If you are questioning why women cannot be safe, then you need to look at yourself and you need to think about why women want to be in women-centred environments and why that has to even be put in place. Because obviously, if you feel threatened to be in a gym with men, I'm just running with this analogy, if you feel threatened to be in a gym, in a space like that with a man, then that is a reflection on society treating women differently. If the only way to get around that, because you are not obviously penalising sexual assaults, you are not saying that it's not okay to do this, that and the other, to look at women and treat women in a certain way, if the only way to do that is to bypass that and have a female-only space, then that says more about society and really highlights the problem.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, I could go on a whole rampage about that, but I am going to move us on, Gina, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So, but given the ineptitude of the police to listen to victims, it's hardly surprising that they actually ended up wasting precious time and numerous lives, given that whilst this was happening, more and more women were getting murdered. And this was by chasing Wayside Jack. And this was later found out to be a hoax. I mentioned that earlier. So, this incident involved a number of letters and tapes, so tape recordings, voice recordings, for our young listeners. Tapes were how you recorded things.
Yeah, not using fancy schmancy laptops and not knowing how to use it.
No, and being able to, delete stuff.
Yeah, and rewinding it with a pencil.
Yeah. So a number of letters and tapes were sent to the lead investigator claiming to be from the killer. And the police decided that this was their man. They decided that it seemed legit. And as the name suggests, he had a Wayside accent, which is a northeast accent. So these letters and tapes were sent out to the media. Excerpts of the handwriting were displayed on billboards around the local area, and you could ring a phone number and hear the supposed killer's voice from the tapes. These are all over the internet, so if you are interested in reading them, if you are interested in listening to them, go and find them. They are really easy to find.
Which would have been great if that wasn't a hoax.
Yeah.
Like, that would have been amazing that they put all of that into this.
Yeah. So part of Sutcliffe's moniker actually is related to this because the letters that were sent really mimicked the letters that were sent to the police during the 1800 murders of the sex workers in the Whitechapel area of London. I'm not saying it because it gives away the moniker and we're not using that, but that information is there everywhere. It's probably one of the most infamous serial killers in the UK, around the world. It's unsolved. So yeah, this is where so these letters that were sent to the police in this incident mimicked those sent back in the 1800s.
It does just show how a moniker really does stick though as well, doesn't it? If it's based on the hoax.
Yeah.
And
it's partly the hoax and partly the
targeting. Yeah,
I think the targeting and the method of murder. I'm not entirely sure which came first, whether that came first and then they ran with this idea for the letters, or I'm not sure kind of the timeline there. I've not delved into it enough because I don't care about the moniker. I just think it's an interesting piece of information to be aware of. But yeah, if you want to go and listen to those, read those letters, they are available on the internet everywhere when you search Peter Sutcliffe. So, like I said, you could ring a phone number and hear the voice, supposedly. And this led to numerous victims being ignored because all the survivors, or a lot of the survivors of Sutcliffe, said how their attacker spoke with a Yorkshire accent and these tapes had a northeast accent. So the police were like, no, all of these X amount of women must be wrong because the killer has spoken to me and because he's a man probably. I'm believing this over the women who are clearly suffered traumatic brain injuries, so all must be wrong, despite the fact that they all said the same thing, they all described the same person, they all, yeah.
Yeah, which then as well, like, it's funny that they didn't go, well, actually, maybe something else is going on. If they were so adamant that this killer had a northeast accent and was this person that wrote to them and spoke to them, and then you had all of these other women going, definitely had a Yorkshire accent, definitely had a Yorkshire accent, looked like this, sounded like this, why they weren't then going, well, yes, if we are right, then this is also another issue that we've got going on.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's weird how he can be blindsided in such a way, because it's not like all the victims were murdered. We have survivors telling the police.
Yeah. Which obviously there's so many different crimes that go on that, yeah, it might not have even been linked and they might have been right there. But it's really interesting to note that they were just blatantly ignored, not even like, oh, I don't think it was this person, but...
Yeah. And what's more scary, having numerous people attacking people in the same way, or having one person and one person who's fucking made some shit up.
Which is especially, like, I mean, we see this all the time where they try and tie everything into one person because you don't want to admit that there's X amount of people doing these awful things, because we don't want, as a society, to believe that awful things are possible, even though we know that they are.
And we don't want to believe that it's not just one bad egg.
No.
It's easy to say, oh, well, it's just one wrong person, not... Actually, we've got about 10 people all operating and doing all these bad things in, like, a really small area.
Yeah.
So, we ignored the victims about the accent. Also meant that the 9 times that they spoke to Peter Sutcliffe, they ignored it because he had a Yorkshire accent. So this whole fucking hoax cost so many lives, and obviously will have cost so much money chasing down irrelevant leads. I am going to move on because, again, we could be here all day and it's already going to be a long enough podcast. But I will say the hoaxer was finally actually identified through DNA analysis in 2005, so over 25 to 30 years later. I'm not sure exactly what year these tapes were sent in. And he was identified as John Humble, who would have been 27 at the time.
Just a quick one. Did anything happen to him? Like, did he get arrested or anything?
Yes. He got arrested. I think he spent time in prison. Yeah.
Probably spent more time in prison than fucking Peter Sutcliffe.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no. And he said he felt like he tried, actually, whilst the police were running with it, to ring a tip line and say that it was a hoax, and they just ignored him.
Yes.
So he did feel guilty, and rightly fucking should have, but yeah, lots of issues going on there. He definitely got arrested. I can't remember if he died in prison or whether he died after he was released from prison, but he did serve some time. So, many, many, many more errors were made during the investigation, but like I've said, we'd genuinely be here all day, and it makes me so angry, in case you've not already noticed. So we'll leave it at that. They're the kind of main issues, and there are so many websites, podcasts, everything deep diving into this, so if you are interested, please find something on Google, and a quick Google search will return you so many results, and you'll have lots to look into.
Yeah, so just for considering this is a podcast and we cannot see Melissa right now, I can, and the arm movements are getting more and more exaggerated as she gets more angry. Just thought that was quite funny to note.
Yeah, so we'll leave it at that.
And a deep breath.
Yeah, breathe.
Zen.
So, Peter Sutcliffe was finally apprehended, not through good police work in this investigation, but through good police work from a single officer who had a gut instinct that something was wrong. And he pulled over a car in a kind of known red light area, and it had false license plates, something was fishy, and that's how Sutcliffe was arrested. So, on the 2nd of January 1981, Sutcliffe was pulled over during a random check in Sheffield's red light district in South Yorkshire. His licence plates were ran and they were seen to be false, and he was found in the car with a previously convicted sex worker, so they arrested them both. When they arrested him, Sutcliffe claimed that he needed to pee, so he ran off a couple of feet away. The next day, the arresting officer had such a niggly feeling about this that he went back to the area where Sutcliffe claimed he needed to pee, and he found a hammer and a knife that was been hidden. And thankfully, during this time when the arresting officer went back, Sutcliffe was still being interrogated at the station. 2 days later, on the 4th of January, he gave up his denials and gave a detailed confession of his crimes. The arrest, charge and subsequent trial were a media shit show. Again, I'm not going into much detail here, but he pleaded not guilty on the grounds of diminished responsibility caused by paranoid schizophrenia. So he was convicted by a majority verdict of 10-2, but that really surprised me. I would have thought that it would have been a full jury conviction. I'm surprised that it actually just went off a majority.
I wonder if that was something to do with the hoax then.
I don't know.
I wonder if they were so swayed that they were like, no, he's not him. I mean, obviously, I don't know. I'm just speculating.
Or is it the victims?
Yeah,
the victim profile.
Yeah.
If you're if the media and the police have run with this idea that he's killing unworthy, and the people who were innocent were a mistake on his part, then if he ran with that, yeah. I just found it interesting, but I didn't delve into it. I would love to. Should maybe do some more research onto that, but
I guess you don't
probably
know
annoy
what the jury comprised of, like whether it was men, women, and what, because I guess
that will influence.
That will. I mean, it does influence. That's the point in it being a jury. Like that is the whole point in having juries, is kind of who you are done by peers, which therefore is technically men in his part.
Yeah.
But surely there was some women on there, and I would imagine that maybe in that time, women's thoughts on sex workers was maybe more strong than men's, and therefore maybe misconstrued that a little bit. Yeah. Obviously, again, don't know. Like you said, you've not done a deep dive into it. I definitely haven't. So, just total speculation on my part.
Yeah, I would like to know that. So if anyone has an overview of why it was a majority verdict and not a full jury conviction, please let us know.
Yeah, please write in and let us know.
Yeah. But he was convicted of 13 murders and 7 attempted murders, and he was sentenced to 20 counts of life imprisonment. He was initially detained at HMP Parkhurst before actually getting his diagnosis as a paranoid schizophrenic, and then he moved to Broadmoor Hospital in 1984. Then in 2016 he moved to HMP Frankland, and then he died, like I said before, in November 2020, aged 74, from COVID. I think it's safe to say that we could run an entire podcast for years delving into this case, and people have written books. Like I said, there's so much information out there, so please go see it if you're interested in looking into this more. But we're going to leave it here. I'm sure you've heard me talking for long enough. Gina's seen me getting frustrated for long enough. Because there is so much information out there, and we've only covered the murdered victims really in this episode, we're going to focus our monthly special on the survivors, or the ones who have been confirmed survivors of Sutcliffe, as I think it's equally as important to remember those victims. So make sure you listen to that episode,
which will be released on the 8th of April.
So for now, let's remember the 13 confirmed murder victims of Peter Sutcliffe, who we want to remember not as sex workers or not sex workers, but as women who were living their lives to the best that they could with whatever circumstances that they had been dealt. Wilma McCann, aged 28. Emily Jackson, aged 42. Irene Richardson, aged 28. Patricia Atkinson, aged 32. Jane MacDonald, aged 16. Jean Jordan, aged 20. Yvonne Pearson, aged 21. Helen Ricker, aged 18. Vera Millward, aged 40. Josephine Whitaker, aged 19. Barbara Leach, aged 20. Marguerite Walls, aged 47. Jacqueline Hill, aged 20. All episodes are written and presented by Melissa and Georgina Scora.
Editing is by Vicky Hunter.
All of our sources can be found in our show notes or on our website.
Take care.
Stay safe out there.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.